be your facilitator and trying to manage technology that I clearly do not understand. And so if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Otherwise, I will let the judges introduce themselves and take it from here.
I have to unmute. So good afternoon. My name is Tammy Waller, and I am the Director for K-12 Social Studies and World and Native Languages at the Arizona Department of Education.
My name is Lynn Simons, and I'm a state district court judge in Reno, Nevada, and I'm honored to be here at my second nationals judging.
Oh, you're muted, Judge Snow.
Thank you. All right. My name is Murray Snow, and I'm the Chief Judge for the Federal District Court in Arizona.
So we'd like you to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. We are Foothill High School's Unit 6, representing the state of California. My name is Luke Ritchie.
My name is Allie Lamb.
And my name is Robert Gann. We would like to thank the judges, audience, and timekeeper for being here today, and we would like to introduce our coaches, Mr. McBride, Mr. Dedamore, and Mr. Constantelos.
Thank you. So we are doing Unit 6. What challenges might face American constitutional democracy in the 21st century? Question number 1. Thomas Hobbes noted that life in a state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. How has the human condition changed over time, and how is that change reflected in our expectations of government? Should the principles of natural rights or classical republicanism guide policy changes designed to improve the condition of all people? What are the most pressing domestic and global challenges facing Americans today and in the future? What policies can you suggest to address them?
Thomas Hobbes wrote in Leviathan that people are naturally untrustworthy and that the condition of man is a condition of war of everyone against everyone. But we believe he mischaracterized signs of progress as symptoms of chaos. The human condition, while conflicted and perilous, isn't an entropic free-for-all. It is a constantly changing struggle to make society more inclusive.
We argue humanity's greatest change is improved material conditions. Longevity, comfort, and fast communication are more accessible than ever before, raising government's responsibilities to regulate and protect an increasingly educated and connected public. Securities like human rights, a clean environment, health care, and welfare are now a common expectation of any functional government.
However, we must also recognize where these expectations haven't been realized. Continuing effects of imperialism leave regions unjustly impeded from modernization. Regardless of our expectations for government, we must also expect the people to engage technology's political potential and improve the condition for everyone, from Enlightenment printing presses in Hobbes' day to China's Me Too movement that used emojis to evade censorship.
But this discussion of reform raises the question, what philosophy should guide government? The framers embraced these philosophies as seen in the preamble's promotion of the general welfare and Bill of Rights protection of fundamental rights. However, we believe both classical republicanism and natural rights philosophy fall short when trying to improve the condition of all people due to inherent contradictions.
Classical republicanism, for example, is dependent on segregated social classes for its common good. For Plato, the myth of the metal states that people must stay in their natural social class. In the Politics, Aristotle excluded women, slaves, foreigners, and most workers from citizenship and thereby political engagement. And the founders generally continued this legacy to maintain classical republican social order.
With natural rights, property consistently runs counter to life and liberty, an irony exemplified by John Locke owning stock in the Royal African Slave Trading Company. Similarly, today's prison industrial complex commercializes deprivation of life and liberty. Martin Luther King Jr., recognizing this issue of prioritization of property, called for a revolution of values from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society.
Given these drawbacks, society must avoid cementing itself into any single guiding philosophy. Rather, policy changes should adapt to material conditions and people's changing needs. Political theory is certainly valuable, but only when it's used and examined critically, not accepted as dogma.
Such perspectives must drive solutions to our biggest domestic issue, corporate dominance. Profited interest too often contradicts what best serves the public's needs. For example, the pharmaceutical industry operates for profit and wields a dangerous amount of economic and political power. Insulin, a vital drug used by 7.4 million Americans, costs $99 in the US compared to just $8 in the UK.
We advocate for returning power back to the people most directly affected. Clearly defining the right for employees to unionize is paramount to broaden economic democracy. Additionally, we would propose a universal basic income to increase economic independence and soften the hold that corporations have on today's working class.
Internationally, we identify climate change and uneven COVID-19 vaccination efforts as the most pressing issues. From melting glaciers to overwhelmed ICU wards, the severity of these threats is intense. And according to Harvard's Center for Climate, COVID-19 and climate change may be more connected than they would seem. Rising pollution levels, habitat loss, and warming seas could all lead to more serious and frequent health crises.
By incentivizing reduced emissions targets and penalizing corporations for detrimental practices, we can slow climate change's effects. But regardless of the direction our world takes, we must move to ensure that instead of being nasty, brutish, and short, the human condition is free, fair, and full of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So my first question has to do with some of the domestic and global issues that you've chosen, like climate change, universal basic income, and COVID distribution of resources. These are issues that are very polarized right now in terms of individuals' ideas and viewpoints. How do you propose bringing together these polarized groups of people and factions to be able to promote changes?
I would argue initially that these kinds of reforms require a change in the fundamental way that the public approaches politics. I would agree that a lot of the polarization is impeding us as a nation and as a global community from addressing many of these problems. But I would say that one of the key reasons for that polarization is that we treat politics too much as a separate issue. We see that most of the times it is unpleasant to discuss at dinner tables all over the country. And so I would say that to mirror progressive eras such as the 1960s civil rights movement or the progressive era of the 1920s, those were historical periods in which enthusiasm around politics was driving people to bring change from the bottom up. And I think that's the best kind of way we can attack these systemic issues.
Additionally, I would say that social media is one of the greatest things driving this polarization. When we look to Facebook today, the articles with the most clicks, the most hits that are most popular are articles about vaccine disinformation, vaccines harming the public, vaccines killing people at disproportionate rates. However, the facts don't back this up. And once we get past this, I think this would be a crucial step in kind of bringing these two factions that we see over these issues together and working towards just solving this pandemic as one thing in a united front.
As we look at these global challenges, and you identified international challenges as climate and COVID-19 vaccine issues, with those issues and any other challenges, to which international organizations, if any, should the United States belong in order to address those challenges?
I would first point to the United Nations, which so far has been an essential mechanism through which the United States can address these issues. The United Nations Environment Program being for the environment and the World Health Organization being for COVID-19 vaccination efforts. And I think that by investing more in the international community and that kind of platform that we can try and redistribute global resources, we can incentivize a more thorough and controlled discussion as to what the world should do moving forward.
I would say that while we tend to look towards global organizations to solve these kinds of global issues. I would instead point to the ideas espoused by Murray Bookchin in his famous essay, Ecology and Revolutionary Thought, where he writes that it is actually this centralization of power that often leads to these issues, such as detrimental impacts to the environment. And rather to looking to these centralized powers to address these issues, they should be addressed from a ground up scale as opposed to from the top down.
And I'd like to follow up Luke's point by saying that while we can look to the World Health Organization, for example, to help us with this problem of COVID-19, the COVAX facility that it was supposed to ensure equitable distribution by the World Health Organization has been largely ineffective, as according to the New York Times, less than 1% of Kenya's population is fully vaccinated, while over 20% and growing of the US's adult population continues to be vaccinated. So we see a really uneven distribution, even when going through these international forces.
Several of your solutions have been to advocate that we work from the ground up, that the people work from the ground up to solve some pretty serious and detailed, tangled problems. You've identified the internet as being a source of great disinformation, but you haven't suggested how we can work from the ground up when most people click on disinformation and believe and are motivated by it. How do we solve that problem?
I believe that when we are talking about the ground up, we are again trying to push for that political enthusiasm that we saw in the progressive era. And while the issue of misinformation is extremely important, I think we would say that heightening our method of discourse, meaning being more engaged with each other and having more conversations with each other and being more open about politics rather than adversarial about them, as has been the definition of political culture in the past decade or so, would be a great place to start to not necessarily get rid of misinformation, but at least to exchange information more, so that through that kind of dialectic, we can get closer to finding middle ground and finding policies that a majority of people would support, and then taking that to the relevant authorities.
I would follow that up and say specifically on social media, while First Amendment rights absolutely must be protected, this right to free speech and to have these platforms to espouse your personal opinions, I would say that the CEOs of this company do have that hard job of being the moderator between what is disinformation, what is skewed information, and what is outright hate speech, and what levels of this should be allowed on their platforms, because as we've seen, it can have detrimental effects to the very core of our democracy, as seen with the 2020 election and all the disinformation and chaos around Twitter and Facebook.
Are you comfortable leaving that in the hands of the CEOs?
I would say no, absolutely not. I don't think our unit would put trust in Mark Zuckerberg, for example, to be the immediate moderator, as that one gives him a large amount of power that is far too great, I would say, for one person. In addition, too great just in the hands of one company even. I would say that this would have to be in some way spread out to be more reflective of multiple people's opinions on that board.
I would go further to argue that there must be an increased amount of scrutiny when applied to these social media companies, because if you look at their business model, they will make money and make profit off of this kind of misinformation and polarization, because as we've said before, controversy always gets more clicks, more follows, more likes. And so I would suggest that by utilizing legal arguments such as the Congress's Commerce Clause to regulate interstate commerce, we can use that as a basis to say that because of their increased socioeconomic influence, they have to adhere to more standards of conduct as a private company and a little more oversight from the government.
Does that create First Amendment problems?
I would argue that it would be an extension of ordered liberty, the concept that in return for certain rights, there are still illogical limitations. For example, you have First Amendment rights, but you cannot blast rock and roll at 3 a.m. in the morning. So I would say similar to that, there needs to be, for the health of our political discourse, we need to maintain that.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to give you just a little bit of feedback. And first of all, Lots of great information, really unique twist to how you answered the question. What's been really exciting is we've seen so many different interpretations of this question, and it keeps it fresh and really opens up my eyes, at least. I thought you did a really nice job of laying out your testimony in your prepared speech, and then picking your issues. I guess if I was going to give you a piece of constructive feedback to move forward is I might say to slow down a bit. And I'm thinking in terms of slow down a bit when answering your follow-up questions. Think about what the essence of that question is, and then go into it. And as judges, it's hard for us sometimes with the passion and enthusiasm. People speak really, really fast, and we want to hear everything you've said and have time to reflect on it as we're listening to it. But I thought you guys did an overall great job. Thank you.
I thought you did a great job too. And I liked in the beginning how you just said, Hobbes was wrong. He mischaracterized. And I thought one thing that was really interesting in your testimony is I could tell the amount of work you went into editing it, because your word choice was deliberate and was at a next level. So it wasn't something that was just slapped down on the paper. It's very, very obvious you did a lot of editing. I thought you had a really interesting backdrop of evidence in the sense of Plato, Aristotle, Martin Luther King, Harvard study, along with some date specific, civil rights and the Depression. And I was concerned when I asked my question, because I felt that maybe Luke was taking a left turn because I had very specifically said international, but he kind of brought it back to me he tied it to the bottom up. And I like that symbol. I agreed with some of the questions of my colleague, Judge Snow, because I think that going on, you should have some very specific examples. What does bottom up mean? And I think that you're right, social media can drive polarization, but if you can get people clicking and liking things that you want to start moving the public from the bottom up, it's really a grassroots kind of movement. You can flip all your negatives into positive, and it'll create some interesting dialogue. And you're kind of at that level that you can do that with your word choice. I thought you did a great job. And I really liked the ordered liberty too.
I don't think I need to add a whole lot. I would say that I learned something in the presentation. I also loved your complete rejection of the premise of the question. It was kind of like we were in an episode of Star Trek and you're going to beat the machine by completely rejecting the premise. But the evidence you provided was good. I love the irony that John Locke held stock in a slaveholding trade company, sort of a sad commentary on the limits of our times, which was well portrayed. I thought you did a nice job of following me down the rabbit hole. I think you were pretty thoughtful. I do think, Allie, Luke, you had good things to say. I kind of got the impression that you hung back a little bit, let Robert go first a lot of the time. We'd rather, you're all great. We'd like to hear from you all equally. And that would be my one suggestion as I offer as you go forward. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. And we wish you good luck this afternoon and tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.